the person that you're going to hear from today, she is by far one of the people that I see as what the future version of C-suite life will have to base their foundation on. This woman has over 60,000 people following her right now on TikTok. She has been a CEO 3 different times. In one of her roles, we're going to actually talk about, she was actually a CMO of such companies that you all well and know and love, like HGTV. She's also been able to do something that I think for many people in the C-suite life have struggled to do. And I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. It's called authenticity, meaning not authentic to the company, but true to themselves, and be able to stand on that. And more importantly, be able to lead like that. She's done it 3 times in different various roles. We're going to dive into her story and her life. More importantly, we're also going to dive into how in the world did she get to this point where she said, forget the title, the company name on the door, and whoever they represent, I'm going to represent me first. I want to dive into all of that because I think it's very, very fascinating. For every single woman who is watching or ever listens to this, even on our podcast and our audio experience on all cross platforms, let me just say this to you before I introduce our guest. If you have felt like you've been silenced, marginalized, if you felt like there was a glass ceiling that is prevailing, if you feel like that your talents, what you bring to the table is being underpaid, underutilized, and underrecognized, there is a woman that in today's conversation, I want to make sure you understand is out here to make sure that never happens again. In fact, she's building a really cool program to help women get into more C-suite roles. Yeah, listen, I know you're like, well, okay, tell us who the heck this lady is. Let's go ahead and do this now. Her name, ladies and gentlemen, is Denise Conroy, and she is joining us today, and I'm like really excited to dive directly into this conversation. Denise, how are you doing today?
Welcome. Hello, hello. It's good to be here. How are you?
Man, Denise, let me tell you something. First of all, I expect every single person who ever hears this conversation to really gain a lot of value out of it. Not because I'm putting some pressure on you, but because there's some things that you've done recently on social media. There are things that in our private conversations that we've gotten a chance to talk to that I just find fascinating. So I want to kind of start here. Before you tell everybody where you are and your upbringing, all those things, I want to start here. You strike me as the kind of person that not only has found their voice, but it never really was lost. It's just you weren't using it, and you did it in the most unique way, but in a place that a lot of people spend their living hours of their human existence, and that's in the workplace. While many people won't utter a word about their beliefs, their ideals, their personal message, you decided to not only do that, but you did that at the highest levels of companies. I want to start here, and then we'll work our way around your story and kind of craft it in our interview. But what was the reason for that? Give everybody an understanding of the linchpin moment for you that said, I've got to do more than represent this company and this title. I got to start representing myself. What was that?
I think it was absolutely this practice. It's just a way of being in corporate America where folks who aren't white men have to take themselves and make ourselves smaller and smaller and smaller until you find yourself in this tight wooden box that you can't express yourself, you can't breathe, and you start to not even recognize who you are. So you talk about, finding authenticity. For me, it was about asserting my identity. And frankly, I'm a white woman, so that's easier for me than it is, let's say, for a Black woman. Very, very hard, because there are all these expectations, these tropes, these biases, right? That folks in power in organizations, which usually are white dudes, bring to bear. So for me, I got tired of sitting in the performance review across from usually a white guy, because I was usually the only woman in my organizations in the executive ranks. I got tired of being told to be less. Water yourself down more. You're very intimidating. Be less assertive, less aggressive. I wish they would have used the word assertive. It was more about being aggressive. I was called hostile and volatile, all these things, because when I would assert myself, it was not normal. It was not seen a lot, right? Women didn't do that, especially in the rooms that I was in. So for me, I just got tired of it. And honestly, it was one of the things that made me want to be a CEO. I was in the executive ranks already. And I thought to myself, I think you can be a decent person and also be a CEO. I don't think you have to be a scumbag, right? And silence all the people around you to be a CEO. There's an okay way to use power, and I want to use my power for something that's right and something that's good. So that is really what put me on the path.
Man, so okay. I want to start with uh what I see and some of the things that kind of happened so far. So I'm gonna take you back to December 2022
Yeah.
because you did a post that took off. And in this post, I'm just gonna read my notes here. You were sharing the three things that you wish somebody would have told you
Yes.
as you were climbing this corporate career. You talked about jumping jobs. You talked about having no loyalty to the company, which I found interesting. You talked about people leaving bosses, not the job. Talk about this concept of this post that you did, and give everybody an understanding of like what made you say, and listen, I'm gonna just turn on my camera. I'm just gonna state this thing. And by the way, for those of you who are watching, it's had over 2.9 million views at this point. TikTok alone. I didn't count Instagram because our Instagram is also moving as well. But talk to me about why did you do this post and kind of what was your reaction as you started to notice, like, wait a second, there's more than just like 30 people picking up this post, and now it's getting kind of crazy. What was kind of the start of this here?
I think the start of it has always been, you got to understand, I'm a big sister. So I have four younger brothers, and I've always been a person, I'm a caregiver.
Okay.
So I want to take care of other people. I can't help it. It can be super duper annoying too. So I own that. But I really wish there was nobody to tell me when I was coming up through the ranks those things, right? It was always, I mean, capitalism, not that I hate capitalism, I hate this version of capitalism, right? I think there's a better version. But capitalism's never going to tell you those three things that I told you. But I feel like I'm tired of watching human beings, especially younger human beings, by the way, the folks who haven't been put through the grinder yet. Excuse me. And the folks who, are being gaslit. Excuse me. Sorry, spring. But these folks are being gaslit on the regular about how you're supposed to approach your career and how you're supposed to approach corporate America. But there are no rules for how corporate America approaches you, right? And I feel like every relationship should be reciprocal. So, from my perspective, I just, I got on TikTok. I was terrified of it. I hate being on video. I'm super self conscious. I think I look dorky. But nonetheless, I finally was like, okay, I've got to do this, right? I've done LinkedIn. That's cool. I got to get out there. And I knew it was a younger audience. And I wanted to make sure that this was the advice I gave was universal, not just for the younger audience, but perhaps for even folks who are my age. I'm 51. So that for me was, I want folks to understand that what they feel in their gut about what they do and do not owe an employer or the business world is rational and legitimate.
The interesting thing, I want to kind of dig a little deeper on the third point that you made in this video. You said people, leave bosses, they don't leave jobs. I always tell people, people don't quit jobs because typing on a keyboard is not that hard. learning the software or the process and the tool is not that hard. But people quit people every single day for various reasons, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the workplace. Why did you feel um, the the push to share that particular topic? Because I'm gonna be real with you. It's a very it's one of the most well-known taboo things that companies never address. And I'll give you a perfect example. I did a video recently about the fact that I interviewed some folks who had been quit upon. See, no one ever talks about the other side of like when you see this mass runaway of people who literally will be willing to leave a role. It's not that they're leaving the role. There's someone there that they're actually getting away from. And we never talk to the person who, okay, do you recognize that people are leaving you? You know, or now the spotlight is on them from their bosses of like, why are so many people leaving this particular area? And I did that post because I realized that that's a very few people want to have that discussion because it's uncomfortable and it sucks for the person whose spotlight is on because their job could be in jeopardy, right?
Yeah.
Especially if they don't hold the lion's share of influence in a particular area. But what made you want to address that particular conversation in general of people leaving people? Because that's one of those that is like, please don't poke the bear because I already know it's there, but I don't want to deal with this.
Because I want to normalize a discussion about why bosses are so bad. Okay.
Mm.
And let's first say that there are good bosses, but I don't think good bosses are actually the norm, and that sucks, right? I want to talk about how the system that largely corporate America is predicated on is just a crappy system. And you're talking about a girl who I love systems. I love systems. I love rational things and things that make sense. But a lot that happens in corporate America isn't rational. In fact, it's a little half-assed if we're honest about it. And I like to use my whole ass for everything I do. So one of the things I like to think about is let's think about why we are where we are with bad bosses, okay? The number one reason is corporations spend zero time training people that they put into management. They usually put you into a people manager role because you were really good at doing things and getting a lot of things done. But the problem and the challenge is, and I say this with my coaching clients all the time, there are four distinct kind of career skill sets. First, you're a doer, then you're a super doer. Then you become a coach and a mentor. You kind of scale a wall to manage people. And then you become that visionary, that strategist. And unfortunately, it's that old book, what got you here won't get you there, right? So me just being a great doer doesn't make me a great people manager. And that's where I know that most corporate environments eschew training. And I know you've got a great background in training, but there are not enough trainers and trainings, learning programs happening in corporate America to teach folks how to manage other people. And let's face it, a lot of people management comes from self-actualization. I was a train wreck of a manager, of a human being manager, until I went to therapy and started to deal with, in my case, real mental illness, right? That's not everybody, but that's me. So I just think that we need to have more of a normalization of the conversation about how we gear and how we skill managers, because we're not doing a very good job of it.
Yeah, totally agree. I think one of the most interesting parts about what you just said is my background in corporate learning and development. I had an epiphany moment, and my epiphany moment was being handed the 500-page book and say, "Hey, go train, train our people."
Yeah.
And I was always interested in the numbers and how many times I had to go back to a place, and it'd be like 3-4 months later, I got to go back and do the same thing. And I'm walking in, not to new people, an entirely new audience because they've got high turnover. And I'm like, well, why don't we solve the root of the problem instead of, constantly doing the thing? And I'll never forget, and you've probably been here before, but I'll never forget one of my managers reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, Chris, that's not our problem. Our job is to simply do the job." And that bothered me so, because I'm like, but I want to do the whole job, right? I don't want to just do that part. You strike me as that kind of person who's seeing the other side of it and saying, well, why don't we just deal with the other side and things can get better? what made you, and that leads me to my next question, which speaks to culture. That speaks to organizational culture. That speaks to the experience that people are having while Denise is leading. When did you start to want to make those changes, um, as you became the person that now influences more than just yourself and two or three other people, but now it's 400 people, 5,000 people in organizations? What made you really want to start to really tackle those issues?
Self-interest. I mean, fair to be super fair and transparent. I was at HGTV and I was the CMO, and it was supposed to be a dream job for me. And I came in thinking, wow, this is such a big step. This is going to be so wonderful. I was based in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'd grown up in West Virginia. So I was like, oh, this is pretty similar, culturally, I'll get it. I understand this. And I was just so wrong. It was a really bad system, bad culture for me. It was made known to me that I was not a cultural fit from day one. And unfortunately, while I was taking a fair amount of harassment, berating, gossip, all the bad things that erode a person's spirit, but also hurt cohesion of teams, I was killing it from a performance perspective. Like, I came in to be the head of the marketing team. And as I started to craft what I thought was just a marketing strategy, it became a strategy for the entire network. It moved every piece of the business forward, not just marketing. And so it's amazing that one can be doing incredible work and be a real asset to an institution or an organization, but can also be like, I almost swallowed a bottle of Ambien back in those days. Like, I was being harassed and I felt so ashamed of it because I came from this family that was toxically masculine. My father was the sort who, I remember being a kid and being bullied, and he locked me outside and said, until you kick their ass, you can't come back in. So I had all this like chip on my shoulder ethos, and I just could not deal with the fact that I was being harassed for a paycheck every day. And my lead harasser was our head of HR. So for me, I think one day I just quit. I literally had been in for 3 years. And like I said, had been performing really well, but I was miserable. I was a functional alcoholic. I had already tried to kill myself. And I was just sitting across the desk from this woman one day who was the head of HR. And I just said, I quit. It kind of stunned me. It stunned her. I left and I embarked on this 10-month journey of therapy, learning who I was, honestly, just becoming a human again. And when I became a human and said, okay, I think I have what it takes to be a CEO. I think I've got empathy, which I've been burying for a really long time. That's a whole other story. But I think I have what it takes. I'm now doing the self-actualization work. And what I recognized in looking back at all the places, not just HGTV, that I worked, a CEO and that CEO's worldview will make or break an organization. So unfortunately, I worked for a lot of not great CEOs. They didn't care about people. They certainly didn't care about me. They didn't care about camaraderie or honestly, in some instances, performance. They just cared about being right or feeling powerful. So I decided for me, I wanted to be a CEO and see if I could come up with a different model. Right? Is that possible? And, I finally, after doing that for 10 years, proved it was possible.
Wow. Okay. So I want to dive into this.
Yeah.
You mentioned most CEOs tend to kind of just be there because they have the power.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a statement and I want your reaction. I personally believe that a lot of times CEOs hide their insecurities behind power.
Oh, yeah. Agreed.
Talk to me about that from your perspective. What's your reaction? And I want to really understand this journey because, to be honest with you, I'm a man, and even as a Black male, the path and the environment and the experience of becoming a CEO widely different than being a woman.
Absolutely.
So I want to really understand the way in which you approached getting there. What was, I really want to dive into this because I really want our audience to understand how you went about going there. But talk to me about that first segment.
Yeah. So, I mean, remember, we live in this system of whiteness and patriarchy, right? And that is going to overarch everything. So it's wild. You'll even see, I'll have some of my clients who are, women of color will come to me and say, man, the most toxic boss I've ever had is, a black woman or a woman, an Asian woman or whatever. And it's like, yeah, because we all live in this system and that's how perks and goodies get handed out, right? So it's not weird. It just means that that's the system we live in, right? And you have to be uber conscientious and conscious and aware to fight that every single day. Right. And I would say, especially for somebody like me who's white, that never goes away. I have to fight that, prejudices and all these stupid things rear their head. And I have to be like, I think that's a prejudice. Right. And I have to, take that and deconstruct it and pull it apart. But I would say that, when I looked at what I wanted to do intentionally, something that was very hard for me, I'm from Appalachia. And Appalachia is very hard scrabble. My people were Irish and, scrappy, like kind of, I don't know. I mean, white trash, I guess is what I would call them. And we did not show our feelings. So I was sexually assaulted by 5 neighborhood kids when I was 5. And I did not tell a soul. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my people, teachers at school. I didn't tell anybody. I just felt ashamed, mistrustful. Literally overnight, I changed into a different kid. So up until I was 43 years old, working at HGTV, I never saw a therapist. I never dealt with any of my stuff because let's face it, Appalachians, we don't do that, right? People from West Virginia, we don't talk about our feelings with a perfect stranger and pay them to do so. Thank you very much. So that was something that I went for. And honestly, the only reason I got into it was because my marriage was falling apart. So I was like, I'll go to counseling and see if I can save my 20-year marriage. Turned out after about 2 sessions, I was like, I don't want to save this marriage. This marriage sucks, but I need work. So that was when I sought out my own single therapy. But for me, in terms of like breaking down what I needed, I had to be brave enough, and I knew this when I worked at HGTV, not until I was at the very end of my rope there and at the end of my tenure. I didn't show my authentic self. I showed people what I wanted them to see. I showed a mask. I showed a tough version of me. And yes, I am a tough broad. I am also very, very sensitive and very human. And those are emotions I now show to other people. And frankly, once I became a CEO, I gave it a try. I'm pretty brave when it comes to trial and error and kind of A/B testing, even with myself. And I went into my first role as a CEO thinking, what if I showed people who I was, right? What if I was honest about the fact that I'm mentally ill, that I have had, general anxiety disorder since I was 5, right? Because of the trauma I went through. I take 2 different meds. I go to therapy regularly. I have nightmares every night because I have PTSD. What if I just let people know who I was? And what I found is that people are pretty lovely. They're supportive and kind. And when I show them a little bit of something of myself, they'll show me who they are. And then we can kind of recognize and see each other. In the world today, if I say to somebody, what's the most important thing you can do? Or what are the 3 most powerful words in the English language? And people say, I love you. I don't think I love you is enough. I really don't. I think I see you is more important. And I think so much of what we're lacking and so much of what I tried to instill in the organizations I ran is I wanted people to know that I saw them. So if they were toiling, struggling, not fitting in, struggling with their job, struggling with their manager, I would insert myself and try to remove those roadblocks for them, right? Because I think that it took me a while. CEOs remove roadblocks and challenges, and they're usually really hard ones, and we reallocate resources, right? Or we find resources that don't exist. That's what we do all day long, kind of. So that for me was really my process.
Yeah, so let's walk down this path. Let's go from like the beginning all the way up to your first CEO role. So, um, what role were you in? Was it the HGTV role when you said I want to be a CEO? Let's walk through this step by step. So, what role were you in when the kind of aha kind of said, you know what, I think I could lead a company?
So I was at the Outdoor Channel, which is a small television network that's all about hunting and fishing. It's in Southern California. And I had come into that as a director of research. My background was in market research. And I very quickly noticed there was not a coordinated marketing function at the Outdoor Channel. It was a small family owned network. It was a national network, but nonetheless pretty small. So I came up with a proposal, took it to the CEO, and said, hey, I think you need a head of marketing. You need a real marketing function. You're spending, at that time, I think we were spending almost $5 million, but in all different pockets of the organization. So there was no continuity, no coordination, no real ROI tracking on the money we were spending. And for a small network, it was a lot of resource. So came up with this proposal, showed it to him. And he said to me at the time, I think this is great, but I want to see who else is out there in the marketplace to be the head of research. So I was, or the head of marketing. So I was pretty crushed. It was like, I'm the one who comes to you with the plan and the play and the idea, and you've decided you're going to go out and recruit somebody else for it. So I was actually pretty pissed. And 6 months went by and nothing happened. And honestly, I just figured it had died, right? That my proposal had died, that even maybe they weren't going to hire anybody. One day, the CEO saunters into my office and he says, if you want the job, it's yours. The budget is yours. All of it's yours. Go pursue your plan. And I was like, very, very surprised. So that kind of set me on a path. It set me on a path to learn how to be a leader. I knew absolutely nothing. Again, nobody trained me. Nobody, I wasn't prepared for it. Took on a team really quickly, but I was able to move through the ranks there pretty fast. So I was an EVP by the time I left. So it was interesting. I went to a really terrific leadership program. It was almost like a mastermind program for women in the television industry. And I did that in 2009. It lasted for 18 months, 09, 2010. So in 2010, I'm literally sitting at my desk in my office, and I've got a legal pad in front of me. I turn it on its side, and I sketch out what I called at the time a blueprint, right? Just it looked like, chicken scratch. And it was literally like, what do I want to be? I want to be a CEO. How long do I think it's going to take me to get there? I said 5 years at the time. So it's 2010. I'm like, I think by 2015. If I do the following things, and I listed those things out, I think I can be a CEO. And those things were things like I needed to know how to read financial statements. I had come up through marketing. I didn't have a business degree. I have a degree in political science, and didn't know how to read financial statements. And people noticed it. At one of my performance reviews, someone said to me, my boss, who was the COO, said, hey, Denise, we can tell that you don't feel comfortable reading, financials, and you're going to need to figure that out. So I actually went and took a class at Stanford and figured that out. I knew I needed to be a better networker. I'm introverted. And, I was in Temecula, California. So I wasn't up in LA hobnobbing with the bigger network folks. I wasn't in New York doing the same. So I really had to jump out of my comfort zone and make time to get to know those people, right? And to get, for them to know me. So I did that. I had to learn how to manage up and sideways. That was something I was horrible at. And I actually hired an executive coach for the first time ever to help me with that. And I can say that was an absolute game changer. So for me, it was interesting. That was 2010. I get a call from a recruiter who, honestly, I was just having a networking call with. She and I were friendly. And out of the blue, she said, hey, I have this role at HGTV. It's a CMO role. You'd be great for it. Come to think of it, are you interested? And I was like, yeah, sure. I knew I was going to need a CMO role. One, I needed that title, but two, I needed that from a bigger brand. So I went to HGTV in 2011. By the time I got to 2014 December is when I landed my first CEO job. So go back to my blueprint. My blueprint said 5 years. It was about 5 years. So what I say to my clients all the time is, and I'd say this to anyone running a business as well, because I apply it to my business now, there's power in writing down the things that you want. Doesn't mean that you're tethered to them. That doesn't mean they're written in stone. I think it just gives it some weight, and some real reality.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we get to HGTV. How many years were you there?
3.
3 years.
Yeah.
You leave HGTV in a blaze. And what was the next role?
Next role was a company that was, when I came in, called Event Photography Group. It was at the time about an $80 million company backed by private equity, Raymond James, and another firm called Fred Scholar out of New York. And they had partnered to go into this investment. They went out and bought all the graduation photographers, mostly for college, in the United States. So they literally bought about 18 different businesses, brought them together, consolidated that industry. And it definitely was a good size industry. And they really needed a fresh take on the business. And that fresh take on the business required them to build a marketing function. So initially, when they hired me, I was hired as a CMO. I wasn't hired as a CEO. So I come I officially start in, 2015, January. And I'm working for this CEO who had been with the company for 10 years. They had failed an exit. Shutterfly was slated to buy them, and then they didn't pass due diligence. So it was a huge hit to the CEO's morale and kind of everybody else's morale, because they were like, okay, what's next, right? What's going to happen? So while that CEO was licking his wounds, the private equity folks hired me, and the whole intention was I was supposed to train for a year or two under him, learn how to be a CEO, right? From someone who'd been doing it for 10 years. And then I'd jump into his seat. Well, I'm there for 6 months and the morale is horrible. Nothing's moving forward. Everything's a mess. He won't even get out of my way so I can, build a marketing department. So I go back to the private equity guys and I'm like, hey, either something's going to change here or I'm going to leave. And they were like, well, I guess you're going to become the CEO. So I had only been there for 6 months, got promoted to CEO, and the business was messy. I mean, it was no doubt it had a nice stable revenue base, but that revenue base, it was seasonal and it wasn't going to make itself, right? So there were some things that needed to happen from a process, from a tech perspective. So, thankfully I got the role. I was there for how many years? Just under 4. And we exited. We exited and sold the business to a strategic buyer, which was pretty cool for a first-time CEO. That was my very first CEO role. We had 10,000 employees when I left, and we were $130 million business.
Wow. So I want to dive into this moment because I think I want to unpack it so that our audience gets a good understanding of how this really works. So you the players that are involved while you're the CMO with the CEO, and behind them is these private equity group. And
I
they're the
don't.
ones
I don't.
really. You say that again?
I don't. I don't know anything about private equity. I am totally ignorant at this point.
Yeah. So then you find out that, oh, wait a minute, there's this group behind this guy and they kind of have plans for the business. And then 6 months later, now they're like, you make this, reaction and they're like, well, then tag, you're it. Talk to me about what was the first thing that you saw? Because you mentioned there was, it was a kind of a mess, right? And unfortunately, most people don't know until they get behind the wheel anyway, of anything, right? But you recognize there's a mess. Now you're in this role. They've sent out the company email, hey, effective such and such. Denise is now the CEO, and people are like, what the heck just happened?
Right.
What is like one of the first initial things that you saw? And what was one of the first things that you knew you wanted to tackle that would actually move the needle? Because I think, you mentioned earlier, you make a CEO, you're making the tough decisions and, you're moving people around, right? But a lot of times, some of those difficult decisions that need to get made, I would imagine at a CEO's level, are more complicated than what people think they are. It's like, yeah, we know we need to do this, but I've got to actually get several other things moving in order to move this needle. So talk to me about like the first thing you saw, and then what was the first thing that you decided to tackle that you knew you needed to make a move on?
The first thing that I saw was, the board relationship between the previous CEO and the board. And the board of directors consisted largely of some guys from Raymond James, one of the private equity firms, some other guys from the other private equity firm. And then you had one guy who had owned one of the businesses that was acquired that was the most successful business, right? So he still had a little bit of skin in the game and he had a board seat. And what I noticed as just in those first 6 months as the CMO, I noticed that the CEO my predecessor used to keep things from the board. And they were things, quite frankly, that the board needed to know about from a materiality perspective. So there was a lot of hiding, there was a lot of shading, a lot of shrouding. There was also a lot of talking behind the board, behind their backs, which is never good. So, for example, the previous CEO would come to me, and he would, me and the other folks in a room full of his executives, and say, "Oh, so and so on the board's a complete jerk, and he doesn't know what he's doing," and things like that. Well, that's not cool, because eventually you're going to eat your words. It's a bad way to operate. So the first thing I decided is that, and I said this to the guys when they offered me the role, I said, we have to have complete transparency, me and you guys, everybody on the board, because if we don't, and I don't have that safety, psychological safety was not a term then, but if it was, I would have used it. I have to have the safety to be honest with you. And they were like, absolutely, yes. We know that the current CEO keeps things from us, so that's what we want too. And I will say they held up to their word on that. They were honest and forthright. So for me, the first thing I did was I was very open with them about, this is good, this is bad, and this is ugly. Let me show it to you. But then also let me show you how we can fix this, right? What the solution is. The second thing I wanted to do is be able to understand who belonged in what seat, right? The first thing I want to do, any role I've ever had, but certainly as a CEO, I want to know if people are in the right seats, or should they even be on the bus, quite frankly. Maybe, they shouldn't be on the bus. To be fair, there are different people required for different phases in an organization and in the evolution of an org. And not everybody makes that cut for every phase. And I can say that I haven't made that cut for every phase in my career. So I wanted to figure out, do I have the right people that I need? I had some of them. I had some that were just impediments that I needed to exit, right, in a decent way. And always hard, though. I don't care how nice you say you are, or how good the severance package is. Like, it's hard for them, it's hard for you. It's a bad situation to have to exit people, but you have to do it for the greater good. So those were the two things that I really focused on. One thing I noticed too, really early on, I wanted to set the tone for what my brand of leadership was going to be like. And I noticed we had a very long institutional memory in the organization. The example was, there was a woman who was the COO, and she was on my team. I had inherited her. She had been with the org for 30 years, was really good at her job, really knew what she was doing. And she had one bad year in 2009. And one could argue that her year was bad because she's operations, and everything rolls downhill to operations, right? If there's a mess to be made, that's going to roll onto the ops team. And so the folks who owned the business, the private equity guys, went out and bought all these businesses in 2009, right? A lot of new businesses, two that were just giant. And then they basically said to her, 2 months, they buy these businesses a few months before our season is happening in our seasonal revenue cycle. And they're like, hey, integrate these businesses and make sure everything goes smoothly. And she's like, okay. She takes it on like a champ. But at the end of the day, a lot of balls dropped, a lot of things failed. It was just not good. And instead of them taking that on for themselves, they decided, the folks on the board, that they were going to hang that loser sign around this woman's neck, which was wholly unfair. Right. So I'll never forget being in a meeting, and they're like, remember, this person in 2009. And I was like, what are you talking about? And then when they explained it to me, I was like, okay, from now on, we're not talking about that anymore, because it doesn't serve anybody. Right. And by the way, everyone in this room should probably take some responsibility for that. That's not just on her. So I think that was the other thing, is I kind of wanted to drop the mic and say to people, we're going to run this thing a little bit differently, and we're going to be fair, right, in our assessments of other people.
So as you're dealing with these two things, how does a CEO, from your perspective, from where you sat, how do you go about communicating these larger overarching changes down to the person who's, just working in a particular role? Because the truth of the matter is, whether the company's 10,000 or 100,000 people, there is a gap of the reality of the CEO, their operating committee, and the rest of the company. Some companies do a really good job of, trying to communicate. Not a lot of people would have taken your approach of being a real person in front of them. So I'm really curious on, you chosen this real person life, this authentic step into the world. how did you go about communicating to the people who, man, if you cut them tomorrow, you wouldn't see them or know them. They just, but they matter because they still have a job. They're paying for their kids, college and schools too. And they're worried because they probably have known this guy who came in and been there for 10 years. And I always tell people, I think more people are more comfortable with the devil versus a new one, no matter what it is, right? And you're new, right? They don't know you. And most people just worry about, oh my God, that means there's going to be this round of, changes, and she's going to come in here and, try to establish herself like everybody else does. And just, right. Like, how did you go about just helping people say, listen, be comfortable, but also know that, like, listen, we're going to do things differently. What was your approach?
My approach was town hall meetings, and that was my approach, honestly, when I was a CMO at HGTV. I would do these town hall style meetings every quarter. So at minimum, every single quarter, and sometimes I'd add a couple in if it was to cap off a revenue season or something like that. One of the first things I wanted to do was instill a performance mindset in people. So, CEOs talk about that, but many of us don't do anything. It's just a lot of babble. So what I wanted to do first and foremost is to instruct people a little bit on how we make money and what KPIs, right? What metrics do we follow? What do we care about? Because there's a ton of metrics you can follow that honestly don't matter. So one of the things I had to educate on was EBITDA, that earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a fancier way to say a version of profit, basically. But that was everything to our business. It's everything in private equity. It's honestly what most businesses are living and dying by. But I had to explain that to rank and file folks. I mean, hell, a couple of years ago, I didn't even know what it was, right? So I kind of wanted to pull back the curtain and say, let me teach you just a little bit about the finances, the financial metrics we care about. And then let's all start to think through, how do we feed into that? So that was super, super important. I would do those in the town hall meetings. Then I decided, okay, the town halls are good, but you're not always going to get somebody, you'd always be like, does anybody have questions? Well, nobody wants to ask the CEO a question in front of everybody else, right? That could be committing, career suicide. So I decided that I was going to do these lunch and learns where every so often I would just have HR randomly pull different people from different parts of the country. And we would do these lunch and learns where I'd bring lunch and they could sit there and ask me any question they wanted. Those were awesome. That was really, really great. I would present but we had a lot of contractors and temporary employees, but I wanted to reach those folks as well. We had different forums, like we would have little conventions, we would have big meetings where we'd get a big meeting space and they'd be teaching or training on photography technique, things like that. So I'd show up at those, I'd press the flesh, I'd, really just sit around and listen to people. And to be honest, so much about being a great CEO is not about talking. It is honestly about listening, right? I mean, employees will tell you everything you need to know if you open your ears and shut your mouth.
That's definitely going to be one of the tweets. Trust me. um, so I want to quickly switch gears on this because I think it's fascinating. You've now, out of the CEO business, but you're building a business. And before we get into talking about your programs, I do think it's fascinating. Give everybody a little bit of understanding of, you mentioned earlier when you wrote down your kind of 5 things that you need to do to become a CEO, you put them on paper, and then, 4 years later, here you are. What are the things that today, looking back, if there's a woman out there who's saying, yeah, I want to be a CEO, Denise. Yep. That's me. I'm that chick, and I know I need to work on some things. What would be the things that you would say every woman needs to have on her resume in order to make becoming a CEO a real potential?
So I think the first thing is to know what skills you have and what skills you don't have. So I talk about a set of skills called the Magnificent Seven. I actually teach a workshop on them. All my coaching is tethered to these. So, and that's everything. Like, you have to be able to manage up, down, and sideways, right? You have to nail all of those. So if there's one of those, and usually folks fall short on one of those. I fell short on two of them, to be fair. So it was always hard for me to manage my bosses, manage up, and it was always hard for me to manage my peers, manage sideways. So I went out of my way, and that's when I went and found a coach to help me, because I was like, I have no idea how to approach this, right? So that's first. The second piece is that you have to look at is, can you read financial statements, right? I can't say enough. I know it sounds like the most boring skill in the world. I don't need you to be able to make financial statements or do accounting. I just need you to be able to read the company's financials and make intelligent assessments about them and decisions. So there's sort of a whole set of skills that you got to focus on. Then you got to focus on what are the bridge role or roles you're going to need to get there, right? So that was on my blueprint as well. So I knew that working as an EVP, although it was an EVP role at the Outdoor Channel was great, that was not a big enough brand for anybody to care about it. So that's why when the HGTV role came up, I was like, oh, I could go work at HGTV. There's a brand people know. I can be the CMO. Okay, that's a great bridge. So sometimes you need one bridge, two bridges, three bridges. I don't know. It might take, more than that. So you got to figure that out and be strategic. The last piece is networking, which most women, especially, there are men who hate networking too, but networking, I prefer to call community building, because then what that infers is that there's something that's real about it rather than transactional. I think most people would agree we don't love transactional type networking. For me, I like to get to know a person first and then figure out where we intersect and how we can help each other. I don't really love the whole, I meet a person for the first time and then I'm like, hey, what do you do for a living? Meaning, what can you do for me? Like, I don't like that. I think it's sleazy. So I think that's probably the last piece, is the networking piece. Those are the three things I think you need to be laser focused on and check off.
Yeah. So, there's an idea that says, all right, Denise, this sounds great, but where am I going to get the time, the effort, the opportunities to even get some of these bridges to actually getting that look eventually down the road? What type of advice would you give a woman who's looking at her bridges and her landscape and going, man, this is going to take a lot more than what I thought, and I might need somebody to put a spotlight on me. In some people call it sponsorship, right?
Yeah.
In corporate, what's some of those things that are important for people who haven't yet started that process yet, but you say, you know what, here's the way to take an outlook assessment if this is what you want, right? Because I think one of the things that we forget is sometimes the thing that we want comes with some hard truths.
Yes.
You have to be willing to accept those hard truths. And it's not about, I'm going to change the hard truth. You probably can never do that in 10 lifetimes. What you have to learn how to do is, what I like to say is, you got to know the game you're playing. You just need to learn how to play it better, right? How could women play this game better so that those opportunities and that harsh reality, I can accept it and I can continue to navigate? How do we do that?
So the first thing I would say to you is, if you look at this and think it's one giant step, it's not one giant step. It's a trillion tiny ones. So, and it's wild when you think about 5 years. To me, is not a long period of time. So from the time that I sat down and said, I want to be a CEO, to the time I actually became one, that is not a lot of time. And I did not take giant man-sized steps, right? I was not the Jolly Green Giant with my steps. I took these baby steps, but I took them consistently almost every single day. So it's what I would say, if you love the movie Moneyball, and if you don't, go watch the movie Moneyball, because the whole idea in baseball that everybody was looking for the big hitters who could get home runs. And then you had the Oakland A's who decided to do it differently. And they were like, all we got to do is get on base. If we can get on base and get another guy on base and another guy on base, you create momentum. So one of the things I say to my clients all the time is, momentum builds momentum, right? All I got to do is start something, take tiny steps every day, and you will start to feel the change in the momentum before you see it. That's just the rule of momentum. But then you're going to see it and you're going to be like, holy crap, the stuff that I've been doing is really impactful. So the first thing that you can do to get some momentum cranking is schedule 90 uninterrupted minutes once a week. Do it during a time when you are unlikely to have people bothering you, right? So don't do it Monday morning when you know you're going to be hit with, a million things that have to be done from over the weekend. For me, it was always 3 o'clock on Fridays. And literally about the same time that I got a coach, wrote that blueprint, I started carving out 3 to 4:30 on Fridays. At the time I had an assistant and I said, hey, can you help me with this? Because I'm like any other human being. I'm going to push it off if I can, because that's just who I am. And she was like, yep, I'm your person that's in this. And we got to the point of where people would still try to interrupt me during my time. And even though my assistant would say that this is Denise's time to be strategic and it's her time, people didn't care. So she finally came to me and said, you're going to have to go to Starbucks at this time every week just to be offsite. People will leave you alone. And eventually, I did that. Eventually I was able to come back because people got used to the fact that on Fridays I wasn't going to be there at that time. But you want to use that time to do your deep thinking, to do your steps. If it's just as simple as listening to podcasts and getting inspired, is it reading articles in journals and pubs, business pubs, and getting inspired? That's what it might be one week, right? Or maybe you're like, I think I want to start being a thought leader, and you pick a platform and you go for it. But these are all additive things that are going to make your blueprint move, right? It's going to put that into action. So of all the things that I could suggest to you, make 90 minutes a week to think really strategically about yourself, your brain, your career. And that's when you can start getting that fire going to move it forward.
Awesome. Good deal. So let's talk about your program. So, well, before I even ask you about your program, I got to ask this question because I'd be terrible if I didn't.
Yeah.
You going to take another CEO job if offered?
No.
Really?
Never.
Really? Why not?
I was thinking about this the only day. There's only one, it's not a CEO job per se, it's a president job. My alma mater is West Virginia University, and they're struggling. And I think I could run the hell out of that school. I don't think I will get the chance, though, because usually they are looking for PhDs. It's a whole different skill set that they look for. I don't think they should look for that skill set, but they do. So that's probably, I was thinking the other day, the only job that's a external president CEO job I'd take.
Interesting. So, in my assumptive nature, I would assume that when somebody's been a CEO, it's almost like being an actor. You get typecasted and you follow the typecast, meaning you were a CEO of a photography company. Well, maybe I'll jump to the next photography company, or within the photography industry. But you seem to see yourself as a CEO who can move their skill set in multiple disciplines. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a polymath. So, and I didn't know what that meant until recently. I have worked
Explain what
in,
that means.
it's a person who is sort of, what is it? Jack or Jill of many trades, master of none. And for me, I feel like I have that Liam Neeson and Taken, that particular set of skills that I can apply to a lot of different things. So I started out working in the steel industry. I've worked in health insurance. I've worked in management consulting, television and entertainment, retail, e-com, photography. I've done a lot of different things, and I feel like I've got a good skill set. I'm a fast learner, and I think a lot of people are. Quite honestly, I don't think it's just CEOs. I think that we don't give people enough credit for learning as fast as they do.
Yeah. Is it? You strike me though as a person who also loves a challenge.
Oh yeah, I like a mess. My family. So I grew up in a dysfunctional family. So all the corporations, for the most part, or companies that I've worked at, have kind of looked like my family. Yeah.
There's an approach. I'm waiting for that book to come out.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about your program. So you step away from CEO world, done it 3 times. You decide I want to go on another mission. And you wanted to specifically help women who are trying to become a CEO. Let's talk about your off ramp to your third CEO role, and talk to me about like why you wanted to build this type of program.
So yeah, I was in my third CEO role working for somebody else. I was working for a former Navy SEAL. His name was Mark Devine, and he had a really interesting business, which was a coaching and training business based on all the magnificent things that a Navy SEAL could impart on people. And there are a lot of folks who've been in special forces who do that sort of stuff. His was really unique in that it was really thoughtful and kind of zen in a way that a lot of Navy SEALs aren't, which is kind of neat for him. But I was there for 6 months and it was just hard. It was hard to work for a founder. I mean, I am a founder now, and founders want it the way they want it. And even sometimes we think we're ready for outsiders and we're not. And I just, frankly, he wasn't ready. But I needed to have that experience because it made me go, huh, there are no women doing this type of work. And when I say no women, that's not entirely true. There are women who are doing influencer work, coaching work at a pretty visible level. But what I saw was a lot of kingmakers, right? You think about Tony Robbins, you think about some of these other, influencers who are into self-improvement, making people better. Those people tend to be men. It's not that folks don't go to Tony Robbins who are women. I've been to his stuff, by the way. I think a lot of it's pretty brilliant. But that said, I was like, where are the women, right, that are teaching other women? Because our space is very unique and our needs are unique. And, that's just the culture and society we live in. So I really decided I wanted to be that queen maker. You've heard of king makers, the, really great men behind great men. And I wanted to be the person who's advising women in the same way, almost like that Godfather consigliere. And that's, for better or for worse, what I've been doing now for the last almost 18 months.
Now, as you started this journey, this was different because this wasn't I'm coming in and the company's running hundreds of millions of dollars. And I just got to figure out the pieces. There's already, 500 people here, 10,000 people here. I've already got the resources. This is your idea from $0, zero operation. This is yours, right? And it's like having a kid, right? What was or what has been the hardest challenge for you so far? Even though you've got all this experience of being the CMO, being the CEO, what's been the hardest challenge right now?
I'm a gadfly, and it's funny because it used to really annoy me when I worked with founders, and now I am one, and I'm doing all the stuff that founders do, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so annoying. And it's nice. My husband, he does my back office stuff for me. He's retired, and so he set up my CRM. He did all kinds of really critical stuff. And I will come up with a new idea for a new product daily. And I'm like, I'm going to launch this. And he's like, how about we just live with the stuff that we've launched? And I'm like, oh, yeah. So I think the hardest thing for me is I'm not really good with letting something live and breathe, which as a CEO for somebody else, I was great with it. But with myself, I've always got another idea and I always want to launch a new thing, it's a bad idea. I mean, you got to give some oxygen to the things and effort that you've already launched. Right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. How did you find your first client?
My first client found me, actually. I hadn't even decided to do this, and I live in a small community in the Lakes region of New Hampshire, and we have a really cute town called Wolfboro next door, and that's sort of where everything is. Like, there's a great main street, there's cute restaurants, but there's this one couple that has this amazing restaurant, and we've known them since we moved up here, right? We ate at their restaurants where we decided to buy a farm here. Like, it's a kind of a special little place to us. And we just really love them. We love their approach to food. We love everything. And they came to me and said, hey, you've got all this experience in business. Would you help us refine our restaurant and really start to come up with the next iteration? They had just been through the pandemic and they had weathered it better than most, but that's because they did some pretty innovative stuff. So they were like, we'd like to take that, build on it. Will you work with us? So that was my first client. And then oddly, I was a member of a women's group called Chief at the time, and women just started to kind of come out of the woodwork and, asked if I would coach them, and that's how it grew.
So what's the goal here? What are we ultimately after?
I'd like to start a community for that truly is intersectional, though. And one thing I talk a lot about is there's a lot of white feminism out there, which, to be fair, I think most of my life I practiced white feminism, to be honest,
Mm,
because were many times when I was only thinking about myself and I wasn't thinking about what the challenges for women of color, maybe women who aren't, hetero look like or cisgendered. And I think that I would love to have an accessible, meaning monetarily, financially accessible community of women. For those of us who can pay, right? And I'm privileged enough to be able to pay, we can pay. But for those who can't, I don't think that those people should be barred, and this is where there's a social mission piece here. I don't
mhm.
think that women who have big dreams, big desires should be barred from getting the knowledge that I'm imparting. So one of the things I do with my coaching right now is I offer scholarships. I've offered about just under $150,000 in scholarships.
Wow.
And literally, I say this to people, and I've gotten some crap for it, but Black women go first, followed by other women of color. That's how I hand them out. You have to be someone who's in transition, looking for your next role, but you can enroll if you get a scholarship from me in any workshop that I have for free. I take half-hour sessions with these folks just to, be able to help them stay on track or give advice. But to me, and what enables me to do it, right? It's an ecosystem because I got other women who can afford to pay for my more expensive programs, and that's how I feed the ecosystem. So I'd love to
S-
see that happen on a bigger basis. Sorry.
Interesting. So, why Black women first?
Black women go first from my perspective because Black women have it hardest. Black women are seen in the workforce, especially as angry, intimidating. They are often silenced. It's amazing. 60% of my clients that I do one on one coaching with are women of color, and 40% of those women are actually Black women. And what I hear from them over and over again, and it's their lived experience, why wouldn't I believe them? I believe them, is that they're often always looking for a new environment because the environment that they're in tries to force them to be something that they're not. Remember how I talked early on about how I felt like I was always, squishing into a box, a tiny little box. Denise, don't be so hostile, don't be so outspoken, don't be so direct. Well, Black women take that sort of stuff way more than I ever did. So I feel like if we want to if I am true and I am right about wanting to make the world a different place, I have to make a clear path for Black women to be who they are and do whatever the hell they want to do.
Wow, that's interesting. As you look, man, at this climate of corporations, let's start in America. We won't even go globally, but um, America's going through something right now. We don't know what the something is. We won't be able to define it until the future, which is normally how things work. But we're going through something right now. Failing banks, um, interest rates. There's a lot of fear in a lot of employment today. There's a lot of unknown, but the causality are things that just kind of been creeping over time, right? Like we've been seeing it. It's just,
Totally.
now I feel like the rooster's crowing, right? And things are just due. You can't do but so many things for so long and think that it's just going to go away, right? Um, as you take on this mission, what do you say to men? What do you say to us who go, you know what, Denise? Okay, you're right. I hear you. How do I support what you are doing if I'm in a role that is of influence in a corporation today?
First and foremost, if you are true and you really want to do that, you mentioned the word sponsor earlier. And I love reading the stuff that Carla Harris has put together on
Oh
sponsorship.
man,
She's
sheesh.
awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she's awesome.
right? I mean, I see her as an expert on that. And here's what a sponsor does. It is different from a mentor. It is different from an advisor. A sponsor will put their ass on the line to make sure you get to push forward, right? That they push a person or people forward. And that means you put your reputation on the line. It's not an ultimatum, but sometimes it can be, right? Either Denise gets this promotion or something else. And I can tell you, I have walked for people that I want, that I've sponsored, and that in my organizations. I actually quit my second CEO role because the private equity firm I was working for cheated my CFO out of his contractual bonus. And I said, "Are you really sure you want to die on this hill? Because if you do, I'm out." And they said they did, and I left. So that is sponsorship. That is sponsorship, and it's scary and it's risky. And hopefully, in the best case scenario, right, it's just you being in a meeting where the person you are sponsoring is not present, and standing up for that person and saying, well, if we're talking promotions, Denise is the girl. She's it. And here's why. She's the total package. She's blah, blah, blah. And it's you taking that equity. We get equity through power, through respect in an organization. It's putting it on the line for somebody else.
Yeah, that's really well said. But before we wrap up, I wanna kind of talk through something pretty powerful that you were doing outside of being a former CEO, outside of starting this program for women. Recently, you have been very bold, if I will say, in guns.
Yeah.
You have been willing to bring your full authentic self even into this conversation. And recently we had the Allen, Texas. A couple other things have kind of happened recently. Talk to me about why you chose this conversation as a personal part of what you share broadly, because you have been no fear in sharing your approach to this and why you're speaking on it. And I'd also like to hear about this event that is going on, because I do think it's very unique, in the sense that I'm not sure people understand what's potentially going to happen if this event does what it sounds like it could really do. So talk a little bit about your approach to gun violence here in America.
Yeah. So remember, I worked at the Outdoor Channel for almost 8 years. So I literally remember sitting across a banquet table from Wayne LaPierre with the National Rifle Association. I worked with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. So I've worked with some of the biggest handgun manufacturers. I know I was privy to what they said behind the scenes. So a lot of the vim and the vigor and the vitriol that these folks espouse, they don't feel that way behind the scenes. For example, when I was working at the Outdoor Channel, Obama had just been elected. And while, yeah, a lot of people who did not love seeing a black president, the firearms manufacturers were interesting. And the folks in that lobby, the NRA folks, the NSSF folks, they were more behind the scenes saying Barack Obama is the best thing that ever happened to gun violence. They were basically admitting that they know that there's white supremacy inherent in this frenzy towards guns. They knew it. They weren't ashamed of it. Why would they be? It's kind of what the Second Amendment was founded on. So I think for me, I've been doing my own work, and I've been doing my own anti-racist work. I got involved with that after I watched the documentary Deconstructing Karen. And then the same folks behind that documentary have a book. It's called White Women, Everything You Know About Your Own Racism and How to Do Better. And it kind of blew my mind because there were a lot of things that were racist that I have done nothing to neutralize, deconstruct, dismantle. And I've always seen myself, I came from a very progressive family, whatever that means. And it's not progressive enough. We'll just put the headline there. And I think that as I started to remember, I've got an undergrad in political science. I got a graduate degree in political science. I think I'm pretty educated, and I've started to read about the foundations of the Second Amendment. Foundations of the Second Amendment were about two things. They were about having a militia. They don't mean militia as in the militia that fights England and the king. Militia means to fight Native Americans to go onto their land. And whether they raid us or we raid them, it was all about white colonists being able to take something that wasn't theirs and then defend it with guns. The second piece is then you fast forward to the times of antebellum slavery, the South. You have these big plantations that are based on, the whole economy is based on slave labor. Then guns were used to both brutalize those folks, but also to keep them scared, keep them subjugated, and keep them in place. So I don't feel super great about having an amendment to the Constitution now that I know better, right? That is really just all about white people being afraid of people who don't look like them, and they got to buy their guns so they can defend themselves. And look at where we see that play out. We see it play out with George Floyd, with the police. We've seen it play out with all these different shootings, right? Breonna Taylor, like so many. And then look at poor Ralph Yarl the other day. I mean, he's a 16-year-old kid. He's the most, I'm looking at this kid. He looks like a band kid. He's like a nerdy band kid. He shows up at my door and I'm afraid of him, so I'm going to shoot him. What? I don't even know what universe we live in, but it's not a place where I want to live. So yeah, I have guns. I live on a farm. I love to shoot, trap, and skeet and clays. And I hunt. My husband and I pheasant hunt. But honestly, I will give my guns away to get rid of this shit. Sorry. I can't watch any more people die. I'm not okay with it.
You know, it's fascinating hearing your perspective, because I would imagine that if Denise today were CEO of X company and these feelings were happening internally,
Yeah,
you would be at an internal conflict.
I would.
Because on one hand, you know what's right to you, what makes you sleep good at night. And you also know that I represent however many thousands of people, and I still have to go out here and lead this company and do all these things amidst the things that I know personally that I feel. I want you to talk to that person right now. The person who's feeling like, Denise, I'm glad you're saying this, and I'm glad I'm hearing this podcast, and I'm glad I'm hearing this interview, but Denise, I'm sitting in a role that does not allow me to share to that level of my support of saying, yes, I agree with you, Denise, and thank you for being a fellow white person who's saying, yeah, we've got to do more than thoughts and prayers and condolences, right? Um, what would you say to that person that might be feeling that internal conflict as a leader in their own company?
I think that that's why June 5th in Denver was created, quite frankly. It's the notion that, together, we white people, white women specifically, we have power. We don't use it. We often pretend like we don't have power. But if you look at the amount of Black men who have been lynched, brutalized, killed because some white woman said, he looked at me funny, or that guy made a pass at me, which we find almost 100% of the time that person did not, right? We white women have always had a lot of power, and I say that there is strength in numbers in that power. So if you don't feel like you can step out there on your own, show up in Denver on the 5th. That's a group of women who look like you. The reason they look like you, not because we're excluding, women of color, it's because police brutalize women who aren't white. Let's not kid ourselves, people who aren't white. And I think that our whiteness, whether this is fair or not, it's completely unfair, by the way, protects us. It's an armor of sort. So the idea behind Denver is for 25,000 women to show up to demand that the governor of Colorado write an executive order that bans all guns and buys them back. I was the one who actually wrote the executive order for the initiative. I think it can be done under federal disaster aid, because I think that right now we have a federal disaster of gun violence in this country. So when someone says to me, how are you going to pay for that? That's how we're going to pay for it. Okay. Like we pay for any other disaster. We have plenty of money when we want it. So I would just say show up, because you just being there, sad as that is, a bunch of white women shutting down downtown Denver, that's a big deal. And if things go the way that they should go, the governor is going to do whatever you want him to do. because he is not going to deal with the shutdown of Denver. He's not going to deal with the calls that he's getting. He won't even be able to take them. But the whole notion behind this, the long game, is to prompt a constitutional convention to repeal the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment has absolutely nothing to do with militias and the tyranny of the government. Nothing.
Wow. Wow. Tell everybody where they can find the information for the June 5th event.
Yeah, you can go to here for the number 4 thekids.com, and that'll give you all the details. You're going to want to RSVP because the organizers want to know how many folks are coming. But again, the idea is to stay there in Denver as long as it takes. Might take a day, might take a week, might take a month. Who knows? But the idea is once Colorado falls, right, and once Colorado does the right thing, then that blueprint can be applied to other blue states.
Let me first off say, I am grateful that you exist. I think there's a very real thing about people who lead these, what I would consider a very incredible life. Not many of them are documented though. Just not enough. I think that's the power of podcasting. I think that's the power of conversation. I think that's the power of saying, hey, my story is unique and somebody needs to hear it. And hey, I'm fighting with you. And I think you have all that wrapped into who you are today. Thank you for your contribution. That'd be the second thing I would say to you. Because I will say that there's a future that we won't be here for that will be different for the young woman born in a future time that will have things changed in her favor that allows her to be able to, see the CEO role not as a, Mount Everest climb, but as a, oh, that's just possible. That's like no different than me working at the grocery store, right? They're all, I can choose either one and I can have either one, right? That doesn't take away from the work that it takes to get there. It just means that it's possible more in that future than it would be today because of what you're standing for today. If you were to talk to Denise at 20 years old, knowing what you know today, the Denises not only in West Virginia, but the Denise in California at 20 years old, the Denise in Ohio, the Denise in Texas, the Denise in Florida, the Denise in North Carolina, the Denise in the UK, the Denise in Asia. What would you like to say to her, knowing what you know now?
First thing I would say is you have to be kinder to yourself, because that self-talk is everything. So be kinder to yourself even when nobody else will. And that's hard because then you're the lone voice, right? That's talking in your head, but be kind in what you say to yourself. And the other thing is, nothing's permanent. And I've learned that there's a lack of permanence in the world that's actually kind of beautiful. And this too shall pass. So sometimes when you are at your lowest of low and you think nobody sees you and you really do think that, there's not much of a life for you, things will change. And usually it'll change not by that whole, like, because you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. There might be some of that, but it'll usually change because some other remarkable human being will actually see you and recognize you and help you. And that's the world that I'm looking for. I want to be that person that sees other people and helps them. I'm not okay with not seeing people.
That's seriously powerful. Well, listen, Denise, tell everybody how they can find you out here in these social media streets. I think what you're doing is just it's incredible. And on behalf of those in the side business builders community, on behalf of the people who look like me, I say thank you, because there's not enough of what you do being shared widely. It's not that that doesn't exist. It's just not shared widely enough. And so I just appreciate your candor and your openness to even come on this platform and have these discussions. So where can they find you in social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on TikTok at Denise Conroy. It's Denise underscore CONROY. And then my website is Themy, THEMY LLC.com.
Awesome. Well, listen, everybody, man, this has been a fire conversation. And to be honest with y'all, the truth is, we could have gone a whole lot longer because there was a lot of other things to pack. We might have to bring Denise back for part two. Listen, if you enjoyed this episode, she needs to know that, and I want to know that down in the comments. If you're watching this on the replay inside of the Side Business Builders community, let me know your thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching today. Man, I look forward to seeing your comments, your conversations. More importantly, thank you for coming to the Grow Your Side Business channel, where I help ambitious employees just like you grow high value side businesses. And I love bringing you interviews such as what you heard today. You heard it from a woman who's been a CEO 3 times, who's stepping away to grab a greater cause to help other women be able to land these roles, and more importantly, just be a better human being. I think that we can all take a lot of notes. I know I did, just from this conversation. Thank you all so much. Take care, and man, we'll see you guys in the next episode.